The first sign came from the sky. It was a Tuesday morning when the long-range sensors on Earth's orbital station picked up something strange. A cluster of ships. Big ones. Moving fast. Moving with purpose. The station commander, a tired man named Colonel Petrov, rubbed his eyes and looked at the screen again. He had been working a double shift. He thought maybe he was seeing things. He was not seeing things. The ships came out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. There were 240 of them. Long, dark, shaped like the bones of some ancient creature. They moved in perfect formation, the way a sword moves, not scattered, not confused, but aimed. And they were aimed at Earth. Colonel Petrov sent the alarm. Then he prayed. The Vorath hegemony had existed for 3,000 years. They had conquered 400 star systems. They had ended civilizations the way humans swat flies quickly, without much thought, without guilt. They were insectoid beings, tall and angular, with 4 arms and eyes that never blinked. They did not feel emotions the way most species did. They felt logic. They felt efficiency. And they had decided, through cold calculation, that humanity was a problem. Not yet. But soon, a human scientist, years earlier, had cracked a form of propulsion technology that should have taken another century to discover. A human engineer had built a reactor that burned cleaner and hotter than anything the galaxy had seen at Earth's stage of development. The Vorath had noticed. They had run their numbers. Their models showed that in approximately 60 years, humanity would reach a level of technological power that could challenge even the hegemony itself. 60 years was nothing to a civilization that thought in millennia. So they came. They did not send a warning. They did not offer a chance to surrender. There was no declaration of war, no diplomatic message, no ultimatum. The Vorath fleet simply arrived, took up position in high orbit, and opened fire. The first city to go was Shanghai. The orbital bombardment was precise. A column of superheated energy came down from space like the finger of some terrible god and touched the city. Shanghai did not burn. It did not crumble. It became glass flat, smooth, silent glass in under 4 seconds. 40 million people were gone before any of them could understand what was happening. Then Mumbai, then Lagos, then São Paulo, then Chicago, then Moscow, then Cairo. 6 cities, 6 columns of light from above, 6 smoking, flat, glass-covered places where there had once been life and noise and children and food, and arguments, and music. The attack took 72 hours. The Vorath were not in a hurry. They were thorough. Earth's defense grid fought back. Missiles launched. Fighter craft scrambled into orbit. Brave pilots flew their ships directly at the Vorath fleet, and were destroyed within seconds. The defense grid, which humanity had been so proud of, which had taken 30 years to build, was torn apart in pieces like paper in the rain. The moon was struck by a stray Vorath weapon and cracked along its southern face. Chunks of rock drifted into space. When it was over, the Vorath fleet held its position for exactly 1 hour. Then it turned and left. No second wave, no ground troops, no occupation. They had done their math. They believed the damage was enough. They believed humanity was finished. Across the galaxy, other civilizations watched. The Kelthera Conclave, an ancient and powerful civilization of tall, blue-skinned beings who controlled 100 systems, watched through their deep space telescope arrays. Their ambassadors held quiet meetings. There was mild concern. There was gentle disapproval. One senior diplomat called the attack regrettable. Another called it a matter for the parties involved. They did not move a single ship. The Syndicate of Minds, a collective of machine intelligences who had been alive since before Earth, had discovered agriculture, ran probability models. They calculated humanity's chance of survival. The number they arrived at was not encouraging. They filed the information in their archives and went back to other things. The Ovesi, the oldest known species in the galaxy, beings who existed partly as light and partly as something no one else could understand, said nothing at all. They rarely did. Humanity was, after all, new, young, small. In the great story of the galaxy, Humans had barely spoken their first words. Other civilizations had come and gone. This was not unusual. This was not their problem. On Earth, in the rubble and the ash and the smoke, people were dying and screaming and pulling each other out of collapsed buildings in the cities that had not been hit. Hospitals ran out of space. Soldiers stood in the streets with no clear orders. Governments scrambled to communicate on broken networks. Children walked through the ruins looking for parents they would never find. And yet, in Geneva, in a bunker 40 meters underground, a group of people gathered. They were from different countries, different backgrounds, different beliefs. Some of them were still bleeding. Some of them had not slept. Some of them had lost everything they loved in the last 72 hours. They sat around a broken table with flickering lights above them, and they looked at each other. One of them was Admiral Yara Osei, of the Earth Defense Command. She was a Nigerian woman in her 50s, with short gray hair and a calm that did not come from peace, but from something much harder, from having already decided something. They needed to send a transmission. That much they all agreed on. The question was, what to say? Some wanted to ask the galaxy for help. Some wanted to declare surrender to the Vorath. Some wanted to say nothing, and simply begin the long process of surviving. Admiral Osei said nothing for a long time. She sat with her hands flat on the table, and she looked at the list of the dead, a number so large it did not feel real yet. She thought about Shanghai. She thought about the children in Mumbai who had been in school when the light came down. She thought about her sister in Lagos, and how there was no Lagos anymore. Then she looked up. "We send one message," she said. "Short. We send it on every frequency. We send it in every galactic language. All 47 of them. What do we say?" someone asked. She told them. They looked at her. A few of them looked unsure. One of them started to argue. She waited for the argument to stop. It stopped quickly. There was something in her eyes that made people quiet. The transmission went out 11 minutes later, bouncing off relay stations and deep space beacons, spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every species with a receiver picked it up. The Vorath picked it up. The Kelthara picked it up. The Syndicate of Minds archived it automatically. It was 3 words. In every language, it said the same thing. "We remember everything." On their ship, the Vorath commander received the message. One of his officers read it aloud. There was a pause. Then the commander made a sound that, in Vorath, meant something close to amusement. He turned away and began writing his mission report. He titled it, "Humanity Threat Resolved." Somewhere across the galaxy, in a Kelthara listening station, a young analyst stared at the 3-word transmission and felt something she couldn't quite name. She had studied many dying civilizations. She had never heard one speak like that before. Not with sorrow. Not with fear. With memory. She saved the transmission in a personal file and went to make tea. She kept thinking about it all evening. She didn't know why. On Earth, the fires were still burning. The glass plains where cities had been reflected the light of the sun in silence. Somewhere in the rubble of what had once been the most connected planet in the galaxy, 4 billion people were still alive. They were breathing. They were angry, and they had not said another word. After the 3 words, Earth went quiet. No more transmissions. No diplomatic channels opened. No ships left the solar system. No requests for aid were sent. No refugees fled to other worlds. The long-range sensors of a dozen civilizations pointed at Sol system and found nothing interesting. A damaged planet, a cracked moon, a scattering of debris where an orbital defense grid used to be. Just a wounded species sitting in the dark, licking its wounds. At least, that is what everyone assumed. The Vorath marked the file closed. Their analysts noted that the remaining human population, estimated at 4 billion, was likely too broken, too scattered, and too primitive to pose any further concern. They moved on to other problems. There were always other problems when you ran a 400-system empire. The Kelthara Conclave sent one diplomatic message to Earth's last known government address, offering humanitarian monitoring. There was no reply. They shrugged in the particular way that Kelthara shrugged a slow ripple across their upper shoulders and filed it as a dead channel. The galaxy forgot about Earth, the way people forget about a light that has gone out. One moment it is there, then it is not. And life continues. But the light had not gone out. What was happening inside the solar system during those 18 months of silence was something no species in recorded galactic history had done before. Not after a near-extinction event. Not after losing billions in 72 hours. Not after having their defense grid shredded, and their moon cracked, and their greatest cities turned to flat glass. Humanity unified. Not slowly. Not through long negotiations and compromises and committees and votes. Quickly. Completely. With a cold and total agreement that settled over the surviving 4 billion people the way winter settles over a landscape heavy, still, and absolute. Admiral Yara Ose did not take power. Power was given to her, unanimously, by every surviving government body, military command, and civilian council, within 3 weeks of the attack. She did not want it. She accepted it because someone had to, and because she was the person everyone looked at when they needed to know what to do next. She held one press conference. Just one. She stood in front of a camera in the Geneva bunker, still wearing the same uniform she had worn during the attack, and she spoke for 4 minutes. She did not talk about grief. She did not talk about hope. She talked about what was going to happen next. Then she turned off the camera and got to work. The first thing she did was silence all outbound communication. Every frequency, every beacon, every long-range transmitter was shut down or switched to receive only. No one outside the solar system would hear a single human voice until she decided otherwise. The second thing she did was convert every civilian factory, shipyard, research lab, and manufacturing plant on Earth, Mars, and the orbital stations to military production. Completely. A factory that had made medical equipment began making reactor cores. A company that had built passenger ships began building warship frames. Universities stopped teaching history and philosophy and began teaching propulsion engineering, weapons design, and tactical AI programming. Kelthera analysts, if they had been watching, would have called it logistically impossible. No species had ever fully converted a planetary economy in under 90 days. The models said it couldn't be done. Humanity did it in 83 days. The reason was simple, and it was the same reason humanity had sent those 3 words and then gone silent. They were not panicking. They were not arguing. They were not distracted by politics or fear or the ordinary noise that fills the space between disaster and action. They were doing one thing, and only one thing. They were building the answer. 3 programs ran simultaneously, in deep secrecy, under names that would later be spoken about in galactic academic papers and military histories for centuries. Together they were called the Silence Projects, though that name was invented by historians after the fact. At the time, they had no collective name. They were simply the work. The first was the warship program. Hundreds of engineers, working in sealed orbital facilities, took the wreckage of the Vorath bombardment weapons, the ones that had turned 6 cities into glass, and spent months reverse engineering them. They did not copy them. They understood them. They found the principles behind them and rebuilt those principles from scratch, with human hands and human thinking, and when they were finished, the weapons they had designed were not copies. They were something new. Something that used the same energy principles, but focused them differently, concentrated them harder, released them faster. A weapon that could do to a warship what the Vorath had done to Shanghai in under 2 seconds. Then they built ships around those weapons. Not defense ships. Not ships designed to intercept or protect. Ships designed for one purpose only: to go somewhere and deliver consequences. The second program was quieter. A team of the best network engineers and AI specialists on Earth built a distributed system spread across thousands of small relay nodes that spent 12 months quietly inserting itself into Vorath communication. Infrastructure. Not loudly. Not visibly. Thread by thread. Signal by signal, the way ivy grows through stone. By the time 6 months had passed, they could read every Vorath military communication. By month 9, they could alter them. By month 12, they could silence them entirely, on command, all at once. The Vorath never noticed. Their cybersecurity was excellent by any standard the galaxy had previously seen. But it had never been tested by human engineers who had nothing left to lose and 18 months of uninterrupted time to work. The third program was the smallest in number and the most dangerous in practice. 300 volunteers chosen for language ability, physical adaptability, and psychological endurance were given Vorath biosignatures, biological modifications that would make them read as Vorath to any scanner. They were inserted into Vorath-controlled space, one at a time, through routes that took months to navigate. Once there, they did nothing dramatic. They walked, they watched, they counted ships, mapped supply lines, identified command structures, noted the location of every repair yard and fuel depot and communication hub in Vorath home space. They touched nothing. They took nothing. They simply remembered. 18 months into the silence, a Kelthera deep-range probe on a routine survey swing near Jupiter's orbit picked up something unusual. A faint energy reading. The probe adjusted its sensors. It ran the reading twice because the first result seemed like an error. It was not an error. In the darkness beyond Jupiter, running with no lights, no transponder signals, no communication of any kind, was a fleet. Not a small fleet. Not the scattered remains of Earth's old defense force. Something new. Something enormous. The probe counted 300 ships before its sensor range gave out. Then 400. Then, when it angled differently and extended its array to maximum, the number climbed past 1,000, past 2,000, and kept going. 3,200 warships, sitting in the dark, fully armed, silent as stones. The probe sent its data back to Kelthera Central Command automatically. It arrived during a routine morning briefing. An analyst pulled it up, looked at it for a long moment, and then did something that Kelthera analysts almost never did during routine briefings. He stood up. Within the hour, the data was in the hands of a senior Kelthera ambassador named Veth Oren, a being who had served in galactic diplomacy for over 2 centuries, and who prided himself on being unshockable. He sat at his desk, and he looked at the sensor image for a very long time. Then he composed a private message to the Vorath High Command. It was short. I recommend you look at what is currently sitting beyond the 4th planet of the Sol system. Do not delay. The Vorath received the message that evening. The High Admiral on duty, a seasoned commander who had overseen the bombardment of 11 civilizations, pulled up his own deep-range sensors and aimed them at the coordinates provided. He found the fleet. He sat in his command chair, and he stared at the screen. He did not speak for a very long time. His officers stood around him in silence, also staring. The ships on the screen were dark and angular and enormous, and there were so very many of them. Each one was pointed outward, aimed, like the 3 words had been aimed 18 months ago. After several minutes, the High Admiral turned to his communications officer and said, very quietly, "Get me the High Throne, now." At some point during those long minutes of staring, one of the junior officers behind him realized something. His hands were cold. His breathing was not steady. He was a Vorath soldier, born into a culture that had never feared anything in 3,000 years. And he was quietly, privately, without wanting to admit it, afraid. He did not fully understand why. The numbers were bad, but numbers alone didn't explain it. It was something else. Something about the way those ships were positioned. The patience of it. The silence of it. Like something that had been waiting. Like something that knew exactly where it was going. He kept this feeling to himself. Across the solar system, in the dark and the quiet, 4 billion humans waited for one woman's word. Admiral Osei stood at the window of her command ship and looked at the fleet she had built. She did not look proud. She did not look angry. She looked the way a person looks when they have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and the moment has finally come to put it down. She turned to her communications officer. "Not yet," she said. "Yes, Admiral." She looked back at the stars. But soon, at exactly 0400 Galactic Standard Time, every Vorath communication network went dark. Not one of them. Not some of them. All of them. At the same moment, across every Vorath-controlled system, every frequency, every military channel, every colony broadcast, every command, relay silence. The lights on their communication boards went from green to nothing. Officers across 400 systems sat up straight in their chairs and started hitting buttons. Nothing worked. The signals were not jammed. They were simply gone, as if the network had never existed. Then, 7 seconds later, every surviving Vorath screen, every display on every ship, every monitor in every command center, every public broadcast terminal in every Vorath city lit up with the same image. 6 cities, burning. Not Vorath cities, human ones. Shanghai, Mumbai, Lagos, Sao Paulo, Chicago, Moscow, Cairo. The images cycled slowly, one after another, each showing the moment of impact, the column of light, the glass that spread outward like a slow, terrible wave. The images were crisp, high definition, taken from Earth's own orbital cameras at the moment of the attack. They played on a loop, over and over, in silence. On the Vorath throne world, the High Admiral was awoken from sleep by a frantic aide. He arrived in the command center in minutes and stood before the screens with his 4 arms rigid at his sides. His officers were shouting across the room. No one had answers. The communication network was gone. The fleet positions across their empire were unknown. They were blind. He understood immediately what had happened. Humans had been inside their network, not recently, for a long time, long enough to own it completely. He had one thought, and it was not a comfortable one. How long have they been watching us? He had no answer. He still had none when, 20 minutes later, his long-range sensors showed something appearing at the edge of Vorath home space. 3,200 human warships dropped out of dark running in perfect formation. They came in slowly, deliberately, at a speed that said they were not rushing. They did not need to rush. They covered the sensor screen from edge to edge, a wall of dark angular shapes, each one running its lights now bright and cold so there would be no confusion. So the Vorath would see clearly. The fleet stopped at a distance just inside weapons range. Then it held position. No one fired. A transmission went out. Not just to the Vorath. To everyone. To every civilization with a receiver. Every galactic news relay. Every diplomatic listening post. The message was broadcast on frequencies that guaranteed it would be picked up from one end of the galaxy to the other. Humanity had planned this. They wanted the galaxy to hear. A voice came through Admiral Osei's voice, clear and flat, and without emotion. You are given no warning. Neither shall you be. A pause. Earth Defense Command. Sol System. Unified Human Authority. That was all. Across the galaxy. In that moment, things went very still. In the Kelthara diplomatic halls, 3 ambassadors stood in front of their communication screens and did not speak. They had been watching the sensor feeds from the edge of Vorath space with growing disbelief for the last hour. They had done the math on the human fleet, the tonnage, the weapon signatures, the formation discipline. The math said something that none of them wanted to say aloud. In the syndicate of minds, the great network of machine intelligences that had existed for 10,000 years, every unit paused its other processes and turned full attention to the situation. Probability models that had given humanity a near-zero chance of survival 18 months ago were deleted. New models were started. The results came back quickly and were immediately marked as high priority. Even the Ovesi, those ancient beings of light, who almost never reacted to anything, had gone quiet in a way that their few observers described as something they had never seen before. The Vorath home fleet launched. They had no choice. 900 warships, the finest armada in the sector, moved to intercept the human fleet. Their commanders had faced worse odds before. They had broken civilizations with less. They moved with the confidence of 3,000 years of victory behind them. The first exchange began at long range. Vorath energy weapons crossed the space between the fleets and struck human ships. Hulls buckled. Ships broke apart. Humans died in the cold silence of space. The way humans had been dying in the cold silence of space since the first terrible hours of the attack on Earth. The human fleet absorbed the hits and closed the distance. More ships were hit. More humans died. And then the ashfall weapons fired for the first time. The guns were large, much larger than anything else on the human ships, built deep into the hull like the spine of the vessel. They made very little sound when they discharged, just a deep vibration that the crew felt in their bones, rather than their ears. What they sent outward was not a beam or a bolt, but something between the two. A compressed column of the same energy the Vorath had once rained down on Earth's cities, focused through a different geometry, released in a different shape, with a different intensity. The first target was the Vorath Fleet Command Ship, the largest vessel in their armada, carrying the fleet admiral, his entire command staff, and the best armor in the Vorath military. It was gone in less than 2 seconds. Not disabled, not damaged, not drifting. Gone. A flash of light so intense it registered on sensors 3 star systems away, and then nothing. Empty space, where a warship had been. In the Kelthera observation room, someone made a sound that was not quite a word. Everyone else was silent. The second Ashfall target was the Vorath fleet's primary communications relay ship, gone. The third was a cluster of 3 destroyers that had gotten close to the human formation. All 3 were deleted from space in a single discharge. The energy column wide enough to take all 3 at once. The Vorath fleet, 900 warships, 30,000 crew, the pride of a 3,000-year empire, began to come apart. It did not happen instantly. Vorath ships were well built, well crewed, and their captains were experienced. They adapted their formations. They tried flanking. They tried pulling the human fleet into crossfire angles. Some of it worked. Human ships were destroyed throughout the battle. The losses were real. The grief was real. The names of the dead would be read aloud at every memorial for a generation. But the difference in firepower was not something tactics could fully bridge. Every time an Ashfall weapon fired, something on the Vorath side ceased to exist. The battle lasted 11 hours. In galactic terms, that is an unusually long time for a fleet engagement of this scale. It lasted 11 hours because the Vorath fought hard, and because Admiral Osei did not push her fleet into unnecessary risk. She advanced steadily, methodically, taking the ground she needed to take, not wasting lives on speed. At the end of the 11th hour, the Vorath home fleet had effectively ceased to exist. What remained was fewer than 40 ships, scattered, damaged, broadcasting surrender signals. The rest was debris. Admiral Osei ordered her weapons to stand down. She opened a channel to the Vorath throne world. Her voice was exactly as calm as it had been at the start. "We are coming down to speak to your leadership. Have them ready. We will not wait." In the Kelthera diplomatic chamber, Veth Oron, the senior ambassador who had sent the warning to the Vorath 2 days earlier, sat in his chair without moving for a long time after the battle ended. He was 217 years old. He had lived through more events than most species remembered. He had watched civilizations fall and rise, and fall again. He had never seen anything like this. Not the destruction. Destruction was common. What he had never seen, what he had no framework for, was the combination of things that humanity had just demonstrated. The patience of 18 months. The silence. The discipline. The weapons that were made from the same energy that had been used to attack them. The message that gave no warning, because they had been given none. Every part of it was connected. Every part of it said the same thing, in the same voice. The voice of a species that had been hurt very badly, and had then sat down quietly and thought, carefully and completely, about what happened next. He picked up a pen, a very old-fashioned habit, and wrote one line on a piece of paper. They used their grief like an engineer uses a blueprint. He looked at it for a moment. Then he started writing a report to the conclave. It was going to be a very long report. There was a great deal to say. Across the galaxy, diplomatic feeds were still running. The battle recording played over and over on news relays, on academic networks, on military intelligence servers. Analysts ran numbers. Generals watched the footage. Scientists examined the weapon signatures. No one was saying much. In a quiet office on a Kelthera research station, the young analyst who had heard humanity's 3-word transmission 18 months ago pulled up the recording again. She listened to it one more time. "We remember everything." She sat back in her chair. "Yes," she said quietly, to no one in particular. You do. The shuttle came down alone. The galaxy watched. Every civilization with long-range sensors had them pointed at the Vorath throne world. Every diplomatic channel was open, recording, archiving. News relays broadcast in real time to thousands of species across hundreds of systems. The scene was simple and strange. A single human shuttle, small as a seed, descending through the clouds of the most powerful homeworld in the sector. Behind it, holding position at the edge of the planet's gravity well, the human fleet waited, silent, dark. No one on the throne world needed to be told it was there. They could feel it. The shuttle landed at the base of the High Command Spire, the tall, dark building at the heart of the Vorath capital from which the hegemony had governed 400 systems for 3,000 years. The landing pad was surrounded by Vorath soldiers, hundreds of them, in full armor, weapons ready. They stood in perfect, disciplined rows, the way a species that had conquered most of the sector knows how to stand. The shuttle door opened. Admiral Yara Osei stepped out first. She was followed by 12 soldiers, just 12. No battle armor, they wore the standard gray uniform of the Earth Defense Command, with no rank decoration except the single stripe on Osei's collar. They walked across the landing pad in a line, 12 humans and 1 admiral, into the middle of hundreds of armed Vorath soldiers, and not one of them hesitated. The image of that walk, captured by a dozen different sensors and broadcast live across the galaxy, became the most viewed recording in galactic history within 48 hours. A small human woman, gray-haired, unhurried, walking alone through the heart of the empire that had tried to erase her species. Her face was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was simply settled, the way the face of someone who has made a decision a long time ago and is now just completing the steps looks settled. The Vorath soldiers did not part easily. Some of them didn't move at all, forcing the humans to walk around them. Osei walked around them. She did not look at them. She walked toward the spire entrance and through it, and her 12 soldiers followed, and the doors closed behind them. Inside, the hall was massive, ceiling lost in shadow, walls carved with the names and records of every system the Vorath had ever claimed. It was meant to impress. It was meant to remind anyone who entered that they were standing inside 3,000 years of power. Osei did not look at the walls. She walked to the long table where the Vorath High Command was waiting 12 senior officials, including the High Sovereign himself, sitting in a row. They were all large, even by Vorath standards. They had been dressed formally. Some of them still had the manner of beings who expected to be in control of a situation. She sat down across from them. No one spoke for a moment. Then the High Sovereign, a Vorath official who had ruled the hegemony for over a century, began to speak. His translator rendered the words smoothly. He spoke about the misunderstanding. He spoke about statistical models and long-term strategic concerns. He spoke about the regrettable nature of what had happened and about the possibility of a productive relationship going forward. Osei listened to all of it without expression. When he stopped, she put a single document on the table and pushed it across to him. "These are the terms," she said. "All of them. There are no others." The High Sovereign looked at the document. He did not pick it up immediately. One of his advisors leaned in, and they exchanged a few quiet words. Then the High Sovereign looked back at Osei. "You expect us to agree to all of this?" "Yes," she said. "Some of these conditions are—" "Yes," she said again. There was a silence. The High Sovereign's 4 hands were flat on the table. He looked at her, the way a being looks at someone they are trying to understand and cannot. "You have the fleet," he said finally. "You could demand more." "I know," she said. "Then why don't you?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because I decided what was enough before I came here. And I keep my decisions." He looked down at the document again. The first term was the Vorath military fleet. Every remaining warship, those that had surrendered in battle, and those still sitting in their shipyards, was to be transferred to Earth's control. Not destroyed, given. Humanity wanted the ships, the engineering knowledge built into them, the manufacturing infrastructure behind them. The Vorath would be left with their civilian vessels, and nothing else. If they ever built another warship without Earth's approval, the terms described the consequences clearly. The second term was information. Every Vorath database containing any information about Earth, military strength, population numbers, city locations, technology levels, infrastructure, anything was to be deleted. Completely. Verified by human engineers who would oversee the process on every Vorath system. Humanity had shown the galaxy what happened when they were treated as a known, calculable quantity. They intended to never be a known quantity again. The third term was the 14 worlds. In the Vorath Empire, there were 14 inhabited worlds whose original species had been conquered and absorbed, some of them over 1,000 years ago. Their own cultures and governments long since replaced by Vorath administration. Osei's terms required all 14 to be released immediately. Their original governing structures, where they still existed, were to be restored. Where they did not exist, Earth would assist in establishing new ones. The Vorath would have no further claim on any of them. The fourth term was the memorial. One Vorath colony world chosen by Earth was to be cleared of all Vorath settlers, who would be relocated to other Vorath worlds at Vorath expense. The planet would be resettled by Earth and managed as a memorial territory. Gardens would be planted. Monuments would be built. The names of the dead from Shanghai and Mumbai and Lagos and Sao Paulo and Chicago and Moscow and Cairo would be engraved in stone, large enough to be seen from orbit. No Vorath citizen would ever set foot on that world again. The fifth term was the final one, and it was the one that made the High Sovereign go very still when he read it. Every Vorath educational institution, every school, every academy, every training program was required to include, in its permanent curriculum, a complete and accurate account of the attack on Earth. Not a summary, not a footnote, a complete account. The decision to attack, the method, the cities that were destroyed, the number of dead, and the full record of what followed. Every generation of Vorath children would learn the names of Earth's 6 cities before they finished their basic education. They would know what the attack cost. They would teach it to their children, and their children's children, and every generation after that. For as long as the Vorath existed as a civilization, the High Sovereign read the fifth term twice. Then he set the document down. "This is not a peace treaty," he said. "This is a lesson." "Yes," Osei said. The room was quiet. The High Sovereign looked at his advisors. None of them had anything useful to offer. The fleet was gone. The communication network was in human hands. The 14 colony worlds were already beginning to see human ships in their orbit. The math was not complicated. He picked up the pen. He signed. Across the galaxy, in diplomatic halls and military command rooms and academic institutions and ordinary living spaces, beings of 100 different species watched the signing in real time. They watched the human admiral stand, collect the signed document, and walk back out of the hall with the same unhurried step she had walked in with. In the Kelthera Grand Council chamber, Ambassador Vethorin sat among his peers and said nothing for a long time after the feed ended. Then an aide leaned toward him and asked what the conclave's official response to these events would be. Vethorin thought about this for a moment. "We will update our threat assessment files," he said quietly. "Humanity will be moved to the top." The aide made a note. "Because of their military capability, sir?" Vethorin shook his head slowly. "Because of how they thought while using it?" he said. "A species that can do what they just did and still decide what is enough, that is a species that will be relevant to every decision in this galaxy for a very long time." Outside the High Command spire, Admiral Osei's shuttle lifted off alone. The 12 soldiers were quiet around her. One of them, a young lieutenant named Chen, barely 25, who had lost his entire family in Shanghai, sat across from her and looked out the window as the throne world dropped away below them. After a while, he said, "We got them, Admiral." Osei looked at the document in her hand. The signature was there. Official. Binding. "Yes," she said. "Does it feel like you thought it would?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the fleet was coming into view. 3,000 ships catching the light of the local sun. "No," she said. She did not say anything else. Chen did not ask. The shuttle moved toward the fleet. Behind them, the Vorath throne world grew small against the stars, and smaller still. And then it was just another point of light in the dark, no different from any other. 5 years passed. The galaxy, in those 5 years, changed in ways that no model had predicted and no historian had planned for. Not loudly, not with dramatic announcements or great ceremonies. It changed the way deep water changes direction slowly, quietly, but completely, and with the kind of force that does not stop once it has started. Earth rebuilt. Not just its cities, though the cities came back, stone by stone, neighborhood by neighborhood, full of noise and people, and the ordinary mess of life that makes a place a place. The glass plains where Shanghai and Mumbai and Lagos and the others had been were not built over immediately. First came the teams who documented everything. Then came the families who walked the glass in silence, leaving flowers. Then, only then, when the living had said what they needed to say to the dead, did construction begin. The new cities were not copies of the old ones. They were something else, taller in some places, lower in others, built around gardens and open spaces that had not existed before. The architects had been told one thing by the unified human authority: build cities that remember what happened, without making memory a cage. They tried their best. Most of them succeeded. The Vorath ships the fleet handed over under the peace terms were brought into human shipyards and taken apart. Not destroyed. Studied. Human engineers spent years understanding how every system worked, every weapon, every drive mechanism. They kept what was useful. They improved what they could improve. They discarded what was inferior to what they had already built. The shipyards on Mars and in the asteroid belt ran without pause, day and night, for 4 years. And what came out of them was a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, a mix of the best of 2 very different schools of military engineering, combined by minds that had spent 5 years thinking about almost nothing else. Earth did not display this fleet openly. They did not publicize its size or capabilities. They simply had it, and the galaxy knew they had it, and no one asked for details. The 14 liberated worlds were the piece of the peace terms that took the most work. Some of them had been under Vorath control for so long that their original governing structures were not just weakened, but genuinely gone. Languages half forgotten, cultural practices nearly erased, populations that had grown up knowing nothing but Vorath administration. Earth sent teams, not soldiers. Linguists, historians, educators, engineers, doctors. People who knew how to help without taking over. People who understood, in a specific and personal way, what it meant to rebuild something that had been broken by someone else's decision. It was slow. It was sometimes frustrating. It did not always go perfectly, but it went. The 14 worlds, over 5 years, found their feet. Some of them formed governments that looked nothing like what they had been before the Vorath came. Some of them rediscovered things they had forgotten about themselves and were genuinely surprised by what they found. 2 of them became close enough to Earth in culture and cooperation that they eventually applied for formal partnership status. Not membership, not absorption, but something new that had no previous name in galactic law and had to be written fresh. The memorial world was named Kintsugi. It was a Japanese word. It referred to the old practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, not hiding the cracks, but filling them with something that made the damage visible and beautiful at once. The person who suggested the name was a ceramics teacher from Osaka. She had been 12 years old when the cities were destroyed. She was 17 when the peace terms were signed. She submitted the name through a public suggestion process that the unified human authority had opened for the memorial world's naming, and it received more votes than any other suggestion by a significant margin. The world itself was a quiet place. Green, mostly. Mild weather. Long coastlines. The Vorath settlers who had lived there were relocated with all their personal property intact and were given a formal acknowledgement in the treaty record, their names, their families, their years of residence. Some of them, in later years, wrote accounts of the relocation that were honest and complicated and did not make anyone entirely the hero or the villain. The monuments on Kintsugi were simple. No weapons, no battle scenes, no images of the fleet, just the names, millions of names, carved in stone, in the languages the people had spoken while they were alive, and below each city's section, In every major galactic language, one sentence. They were here. They were taken. They are not forgotten. Young people from Earth visited every year. So did young people from the 14 liberated worlds. And, more surprisingly, so did small groups of young Vorath students, mostly, fulfilling what was now a mandatory part of their education, the honest account of what their civilization had done and what it had cost. No one had expected that the Vorath students would actually come. The mandatory curriculum was one thing, a document requirement, something that could be technically fulfilled while being practically ignored. But some of them came, and they stood on the green grass of Kintsugi, in small awkward groups, reading the names, and most of them were quiet in the way that people are quiet when something they have read about has become real. Galactic diplomacy rearranged itself around the new reality, without making any great announcement of doing so. Invitations to meetings that had previously been extended to humanity as a courtesy were now extended as a matter of priority. When Earth's ambassador spoke in the Galactic Assembly, the room did not shuffle or whisper or look at their notes. They listened. When Earth's position on something conflicted with a larger power's preference, the larger power thought carefully before pushing back. The Kelthera Conclave published, in the third year after the battle, an updated threat assessment matrix for all known civilizations. The document was classified but leaked within a month, as classified documents almost always are. The section on humanity was the longest single entry in the document. The final line of the section, which was quoted on news relays across the galaxy for weeks, said, "The primary concern is not their military capability, which is considerable. The primary concern is their decision-making pattern under extreme duress, which suggests a species capable of matching or exceeding any civilization this conclave has previously encountered." The Syndicate of Minds published nothing, as they rarely did, but their resource allocation, the vast quiet economy of machine attention, shifted noticeably toward monitoring human activities, not aggressively, not with hostility, with something that the Syndicate's few outside observers described, cautiously, as interest. The Ovesi said nothing. The Ovesi never said anything. But three of them, three beings of ancient light, who had drifted on the edges of the galaxy since before most current civilizations had existed, were observed moving slowly toward the Sol system over the course of 5 years. Moving very slowly. But moving. Nobody spoke about what that might mean. It seemed wiser not to. Admiral Yara Osei retired in the 4th year. She did not make a speech. She did not attend a ceremony. She submitted her resignation in writing, handed command of the fleet to a younger admiral she trusted, and left. She took no honor guard, no official transport. She flew commercial, under a false name, which worked for about 6 hours before someone recognized her, and the news spread across the passenger manifest. She spent the first months of her retirement doing nothing in particular. Walking. Reading things that had nothing to do with military or politics. Sleeping properly for the first time in years. Then she went to Kintsugi. She stayed for 2 weeks, the first time. Then she came back the following year. Then again, the year after that. She walked the monument paths alone, in the mornings. She sat in the gardens in the afternoons. She watched the groups of visitors, human, Vorath, Kelthara, the people from the 14 worlds, moving quietly through the space between the stones. On the third visit, she was sitting on a low stone wall near the Lagos section of the monument, when a young aide found her. He had been sent by the Unified Human Authority with a message about a diplomatic matter. He was new to his job and nervous about approaching her, and he sat down carefully beside her before he remembered to introduce himself. His name was Amara. He was from Lagos, or rather, his parents had been from Lagos, and he had been born in the refugee settlements in the year after the attack, and he had grown up there, and he had never been to the place his parents came from, because the place his parents came from was glass. He had delivered the message before he thought to ask her the question. Once he had asked it, he wasn't entirely sure why he had. It didn't seem entirely professional. But he asked it anyway. "Admiral, are you proud of what we did?" She was quiet for a while. The morning was cool. Somewhere nearby, A group of young Vorath students were moving through the monument paths with a human guide, reading the names. They were being careful. They were looking at everything. Ose watched them. "I'm proud of why we stopped," she said. Amara waited to see if she would say more. She didn't. He thought about it on the long flight back to Earth. He thought about it for a long time after that. He told the story later, many times, in many different contexts when he was asked to speak about the war, when he taught at the academy for a few years, when his own children were old enough to ask. He never found a shorter way to say what he meant when he told it. But the way he always ended it was the same. Humanity had proved something to the galaxy that day. Not that they were dangerous, anyone with a sensor array already knew that. Not that they were powerful. The fleet spoke for itself. What they had proved was something quieter, and in its way more frightening, and also in its way more hopeful. They had proved that the most terrible thing humanity could do was decide. Really decide completely, calmly, with full knowledge of the cost, exactly how far they would go, and then stop there. In a galaxy full of civilizations that either lacked the power to threaten or lacked the restraint to stop, humanity had become something new, something the existing categories didn't quite fit. Not a conqueror, not a victim, not an ally in the ordinary sense. Something more like a fact. A permanent, patient, watchful fact that the galaxy had learned to account for in every calculation it made. The Vorath taught their children the names of the cities. The 14 worlds planted their own gardens. Kintsugi turned green in every season. And the fleet sat in the dark beyond Jupiter, lights off, waiting for a war that no one wanted to start anymore.